My grandfather, John Joseph Rasic, was born to Eva and Nicola Rasic on January 24, 1933 in Los Angeles, California. Born during the Great Depression, my grandfather was one of 4 brothers struggling to get by during these tough times. Pain was afflicted everywhere in the United States. Hope was seen for the first time through the election of FDR as president in March 1933.
He acted swiftly to try and stabilize the economy and provide jobs and relief to those who were suffering. Over the next 8 years, the government instituted a series of experimental projects and programs known collectively as the New Deal. In July of 1933, Congress passed their first federal minimum wage law, granting an amazing 33 cents per hour. This gave Americans the money to buy necessary items such as gas, housing, and protection.
1941, the terrifying events were starting to unfold from World War II, as America was now a key factor in the war. My grandfather, at 8 years old, was experiencing things that no man should ever have to deal with at any point of his life. During this time of war, John was very distraught, having lost many dear friends and family members fighting to protect our freedom. In that same year, John also witnessed the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, a day that will live in infamy to my grandfather and to the Japanese for screwing with the wrong country. Dealing with the effects during the war, John, being the man that he is, kept a strong heart and mind as he attended grammar school at Our Lady of Loretto and supported his family washing cars at the local gas station and washed dishes at my great-grandfather's infamous restaurant, Nicola's, named after himself, where 2 of the greatest pitchers ever, Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax, were to sign their contracts with one of the greatest teams in the MLB, the Dodgers. While still working into his early teen years, the historic battles of World War II were settling in 1945 through Germany's surrender on May 7, 1945, and Japan's surrender on September 2nd after the dropping of 2 atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki 1 month prior. After going through the traumatic and historic events of the Great Depression and World War II, John was in line for a bright future. As a teen, my grandfather was the first of my family in 1947 to attend the greatest scholar-athlete school in the country, being Loyola High School. Following John, 13 of his family members, including myself, came to Loyola in correlation to such a great man. After his studies at Loyola and graduating in 1951, he was accepted into the college that would be forever a part of his life, the University of Southern California. At his time at USC, President Truman was dealing with a country in the midst of the Cold War and the start of the Korean War. The country was in panic as the Russians' nuclear testings continued and many of our troops being deployed to Korea. This time period was known as the Red Scare. Having trouble hearing and faulty technological advancements in the Air Force program he joined, my grandfather decided not to get involved in the wars and focused on his education. With the Korean War over, he graduated from USC in 1955, and in that same year got married to his wife and my grandmother, Joy Nelson. Out of college, my grandfather got a job working construction during the late 50s. To build money and experience, John worked many different classes of construction to support his upcoming family. The 60s brought on many great new changes for my grandfather. During the civil rights movements in 1961, in October, he had twin daughters, Anne and the greatest mom, Kathy. Although, in 1963, their friend and treasured president, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. Contrary to this tragic news, in 1964, 5 months later, he had his first son, my Uncle John, and with more than enough experience as a contractor, he branched off and started his own construction company, Young & Associates. Close out the late 1960s, the Civil Rights Act was passed, ending racial segregation in our country, right about the time my grandparents bought their first car, a convertible Mustang from the legendary Dean Martin. As the Vietnam War continued during this time, bringing death to many families and devastation to all, he had his second and final son in 1969, my uncle, AJ. The 70s were a very happy time for my grandfather as he was raising 4 kids in the perils of sustaining his own construction business. Although, the gas and oil shortage of 1973 affected my grandfather as it is key in managing any construction business. As people were waiting in hour-long lines for gas, this worried my grandfather as he wondered how he would support his family. Through an outstanding relationship with a Texaco gas station, his business was able to get all the equipment they needed and was able to press on and flourish as President Nixon resigned the next year. As the 70s raged on, John was able to focus on family life, coaching softball and Little League games, and watching his twin daughters start as Mayfield as President Carter was elected in 1976. As his daughters are about to graduate in 1979, President Carter, along with his counterpart leaders from Palestine and Israel, signed the Camp David Accord in 1978. In the year of 1979, his son John was accepted into Loyola High School, and the Iran conflicts were in full force through the hostage crisis that would last over a year. The beginning of the 80s, through the horrific plan of the Carter administration, the country went into recession. The world recession brought on many great challenges for my grandfather and his construction business. Thankfully, in 1980, the best president, Ronald Reagan, was elected and turned the country around through his policies, stabilizing the economy and bringing us out of the recession and allowing us to prosper during the late 80s. 80s was also the decade that all of his kids were starting to graduate. His son John graduated from Loyola in 1982, the year after the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. His twin daughters graduated from USC in 1984 as Ronald Reagan was elected for his second term as president. And his son John graduated again, this time from USC in 1986 as the Iran-Contra scandal broke out in full force. And lastly, his son AJ graduated in 1988 from Loyola High School as George Bush Sr. was elected as president after Ronald Reagan's 2 terms. The 90s was the best decade for my grandfather, as all of his kids, including my mom, were getting married and having kids of their own. All of his grandchildren were getting born, as the best date occurred December 16, 1998, when his daughter gave birth to the great Charles Daniel Duncan IV. Though a happy decade, in the end, the country was in panic through the Y2K hallucinations brought on by technology. Throughout his life, my grandfather has experienced the good and the bad. His life is filled with cherished memories that he will hold on to forever through his beloved family members and friends. This journey was one that only a great man such as my grandfather could take. He has always said to me, "Time goes by fast, boy. You better enjoy it." I always will, Jedo. I love you.
Sorry, but I'm just thinking of the right words to say. I know they don't sound the way I planned them to be.